So Canon this morning have officially announced the EOS RP, which is their new entry-level full-frame mirrorless camera to come in below the EOS R. Along with the announcement of the RP, they also announced 6 new RF lenses that are in development, so haven't been released yet, but are slated to be coming out this year. Now, the lenses in question, we have 2 versions of an 85mm f1.2. One a regular 85mm and the other is a DS, which is defocus softening or something. Essentially, it's going to give a softer background than an f1.2 already does. Now, I don't think it's going to be like Canon's old soft focus lenses where it just softened everything. I think they'll find a way to only soften the outer focus areas, not the in focus areas. So that could be an absolute killer portrait lens. They've also announced a 24 to 240mm non-L super zoom lens, which I imagine will be a good travel option to go with the RP once it's announced. Then they have a slightly modified holy trinity of lenses, because they've announced a 15 to 35mm f2.8 IS, a 24 to 70 f2.8 IS, and a 70 to 200 f2.8 IS. Firstly, the 24 to 70 f2.8 IS. A lot of people have been asking for that lens for quite a while, and I think people might have been hoping that it was going to be coming in an EF variant for DSLRs. Unfortunately, Canon are trying to force you over to mirrorless here, but it is going to make a killer general purpose lens for professionals. The 15 to 35 takes the regular 16 to 35 and shaves a mil off the wide end, which will be useful because I remember times when I had a 16 to 35 and a 14mm prime, and I had to kind of juggle between which one was I going to use. I'd try and use the 16, it wasn't wide enough, I'd have to switch to the 14. So I think having 15mm to bridge that gap could make a lot of the high-end 14mm primes kind of redundant. And then lastly, the 70 to 200 f2.8, and the big thing that stands out about this is that it's not big. It's actually a lot smaller than a regular 70 to 200mm lens. It's actually more like the size of Canon's EF 70 to 300mm f4 to 5.6 LIS. Now, everything I've seen of that 70 to 200, the lens has been set at 70mm. So I imagine at 200mm, the barrel will extend out like it does on the 70 to 300, which may disappoint some people having an extending barrel, the additional risk of sucking in dust. However, it is going to make transporting that lens a damn sight easier because it's so much smaller. The only thing I've noticed about the 70 to 200 that I found strange is that the design is backwards compared to all the other RF lenses that we've seen so far. All of these new RF lenses have a control ring. So the prime lenses have a control and a focus ring, and the zooms have a control ring, a focus ring, and a zoom ring. And on every single RF zoom lens so far from Canon, it's gone control ring at the very front of the lens, the focus ring just behind it, and then the zoom ring at the back. Except with the 70 to 200, they've gone completely backwards with it. The zoom ring is right at the front, with the focus ring behind it, and then the control ring is right at the back by the camera body. Which then may confuse people. If you're somebody who regularly uses the control ring and you're used to having the control ring right at the front of the lens, it might throw you that it's at the back. But until people actually get it in their hands and use it, I'm speculating. So with these 6/5 RF lenses, that now expands the lineup of RF lenses to 10/9. So Canon are clearly shifting focus away from EF lenses onto RF. So that's where they see the future going, is in the RF mount. Now, of those 10 lenses in the RF lineup, only 2 of them are non-L lenses. Everything else is L lenses. So Canon are focused more on those pro-level lenses, which is strange because we still haven't got a pro-level body. The EOS R really isn't a pro-level body, and the RP is definitely as entry-level as it gets. Now, the RP, to be fair, is a very interesting proposition. It's fundamentally a 6D Mark II meets an M50 slammed into the EOS R and then dumbed down a bit. It carries the sensor of the 6D Mark II. Yes, it's got a Digic 8 processor versus the Digic 7 in the 6D Mark II, but I don't think the actual image quality is going to be any different than what you see in the 6D Mark II. Now, there was some criticism of the 6D Mark II because of the poor dynamic range of the sensor. I don't think that's going to be any different in the RP. However, I think the RP is more focused at hobbyist photographers, soccer mums who really couldn't give a crap about dynamic range anyway. Now, you're not going to be using the RP for sports and wildlife. It shoots 5 frames a second with no AF tracking, and it shoots less than 4 frames a second with AF tracking. However, if you're just taking family photos, portraits, landscapes, studio photos, product photos, then speed is kind of irrelevant to you. In terms of video, again, the camera's heavily dumbed down. You get 4K at 24 frames a second without dual pixel autofocus. You get 1080 in either 60 or 30 frames a second, and you get 720 in either 30 or 60 frames a second. No full frame 4K, no 120 full HD. Not exactly a surprise for a camera at this price point. So poor video features, probably not interesting for vloggers. However, there is one aspect of the camera that is going to be very appealing to vloggers and also to travel photographers, and that's the weight of it. The weight of this camera is less than 500 grams. It's about 480 with a battery. Now, this is interesting in a good and a bad way. In a good way because that is about the same sort of weight as an M5. And this is a really travel-friendly camera. In a bad way because the camera is still the same sort of size as the EOS R. And the EOS R is nearly 50% heavier. So how have they shed the weight? In the video I saw from Jared Polin, he claims that the camera still feels sturdy, it still feels well built. However, I don't see how you could shave 50% of the weight off the camera and not have kind of some degree of reduction in quality there. I mean, the A7 III is smaller than the EOS R and yet weighs more. So it's not going to be an issue if you're not planning on heavily abusing the camera. It's going to be good that it's so lightweight. However, I would be skeptical about the build quality, and certainly debunks this notion that Sony make toy cameras. But a super lightweight camera is going to be very appealing for travel photographers. Now, the weight alone isn't the only similarity between the RP and the M5, because like the M5, the RP has a single SD card slot in the bottom of the camera, hidden in the battery compartment. And like the M5, that battery compartment is shaped to take the LPE17 battery. Now, this was a bit of a shock to me when I first saw it because the EOS R utilizes the much better quality LPE6, and I kind of just presumed that Canon would use the same battery in the RP. Now, the LPE6 has a rated capacity of 1800 milliamp hours, whereas the LPE17 has only 1040, so is a much smaller capacity battery. This is the same battery that they put in not only the M5, but the M6, the 750 and 760D, and I believe also the 800D and the 77D. Now, it's obviously allowed Canon to produce a lighter camera body. It's allowed them to reduce the size of the grip. Now, the grip of the RP looks smaller than the Sony A7 III, which may suit some people, it may not others. Now, the SEPA rating for this battery in the RP is 250 shots. SEPA ratings you always take with a pinch of salt because they're never right. The SEPA rating of the LPE6 in the EOS R was only 370, and in real life you get like double that. Now, it's rated at 250 shots, but that's when you're using it at 23 degrees using the LCD screen. If you're using the viewfinder, the rated capacity drops to 210 shots. Now, that is kind of normal for mirrorless cameras to drain more battery using the EVF rather than the LCD screen, but it is quite a noticeable jump. You're looking 15-20% drop in battery life there, so it is worth noting that if you're using the EVF, it's going to drain battery quite a lot quicker. One thing that did tickle me as well, though, I was looking at the specs on the digitalpicture.com because I was comparing the RP to the R, and I noticed that the EOS R is rated at 370 shots normally at 23 degrees. However, if you're using it in power saving mode, it goes up to 450 shots on a charge. With the EOS RP, you're at 250 shots standard, and if you put it into power saving mode, you're still at 250 shots. So, not a very good power saving mode. So in theory, the E17 battery in the RP, you should be looking more like 500 shots. Now, I'm not convinced that that's actually the case because, you see, I've used the LPE17 in the M5. I've also used it in my old M3, and I've used it in the 750D DSLR. And In these cameras, you struggle to get 300 shots on a charge, and these are only powering an APS-C sensor, not a bigger full frame. So I don't think the battery life of the RP is actually going to be particularly brilliant. So some of the weight that you've saved from having the smaller camera body, you're probably going to re-lose by needing a few extra batteries in your bag with you at all times. However, again, bearing in mind that this camera is primarily aimed at hobbyist photographers, they're probably not going to be using the camera extensively throughout the day. And that's also helped by the fact that the RP now introduces a USB-C port on the side that allows you to charge the camera externally. Now, I was also interested by the specifications of the autofocus. I mean, it's Canon's dual pixel autofocus. It's got 4,779 AF points, which is more than you could ever really use. What was interesting, however, was that the RP includes IAF in servo track, so you get continuous eye autofocus, which was missing from the EOS R. Now, when the EOS R was announced, Canon quickly came out and said that they were working on a firmware update for the camera, because not only did it not have eye autofocus in AI servo, it also didn't have silent shooting in continuous shooting mode. You could only get those on one shot. The firmware update for the EOS R came out only a few days ago, so right before the release of the RP. However, it only added silent shooting in continuous. It didn't add eye autofocus in AI servo, but we've got it added in the RP. Now, this to me suggests one of two things. Either the system in the RP isn't fully finished and Canon is still trying to improve it, ready to release into the R. Because in the hands-on preview video that I saw this morning from Jared Polin, because he showed that whilst it has continuous eye autofocus, if you or your subject are moving, the camera just cannot track it at all. So perhaps Canon is still trying to iron out the faults with that before releasing it into the EOS R, which seems odd that they would then release a half-baked system into the RP. Why not just neglect it from the RP and release it into both cameras once it's ready? The other possibility is that they just cannot get it to work in the EOS R. The other possibility is that they just can't get it to work in the EOS R. That seems unlikely because the EOS R was only released 6 months ago. It still uses a Digicate processor, so there shouldn't be any reason why they can't get it to work. But for whatever reason, the RP has a form of continuous eye autofocus, which is something that the R doesn't have. It does also have silent shooting in continuous mode, which, as I said, has been recently added into the R. However, the only disappointment with that is that you can only get it through the scenes mode menu, which means that you're shooting in fully automatic. Which is odd because I imagine the kind of people who would want to shoot in fully silent mode are the kind of people who would also want to shoot in manual. And the other thing as well is that silent shutter, you have to have some degree of knowledge about cameras in order to utilize it. If you don't understand how silent shutter works and you try using it under artificial light or for fast-moving subjects, your pictures are going to go to rat shit. And I doubt there's anybody out there who understands the technicalities of using silent shutter but doesn't understand or doesn't want to use the camera in manual. So I can imagine there's going to be a lot of novice users who go into the scene menu, see the option for shooting in completely silent, and then wonder why all the pictures have gone to crap. It's a very entry-level camera. But in all fairness, it has a very entry-level price to go with it. The camera is priced at $1,300 or £1,400 UK. So Canon have aggressively priced this as I thought they might, because the original rumours of $1,600 would put it too close to the A7 III and the Nikon Z6. At $1,300, to be fair, the RP is sitting in a league of its own, because the A7 III and the Z6 are both up and around $2,000. So you're looking at the Canon being close to 50% cheaper than the nearest rivals. Admittedly, in terms of specifications, the RP doesn't come close to the competitors. However, in terms of price, I can see this making the RP one of Canon's best-selling full-frame cameras by a country mile. Now, the only thing that concerns me about this, and I will point out that this is entirely my negative speculation, is that knowing what Canon have been like in the past, I think this could be a very clever strategy from Canon, but very disappointing from the consumer level. Because Canon do low-end cameras really, really well. Get people into the system with good cameras. They're very good at doing that. However, once you then get up into the higher level cameras, this is where Canon starts to fall behind the competition. For a lot of people that I've seen and spoken to, the biggest thing holding them with Canon is the lenses. A lot of people openly admit that the Canon cameras are vastly inferior to the competition, and they would happily switch to a different camera manufacturer if it wasn't for the fact that they were so heavily invested in Canon lenses. And I wonder if maybe Canon sometimes play that to their advantage, maybe push their luck a little bit with how much money they can save on the camera bodies, knowing that people are going to be more reluctant to switch because they're invested in the lenses. And I can see as a potential scenario down the line that with the announcement of the RP, we're going to get a lot of people wanting a cheap full-frame camera, investing in the Canon system, investing in the Canon lenses, and then the Pro bodies in the future might not live up to the competition, but people, again, are going to be reluctant to jump because they're going to be invested in Canon lenses. But to be fair, the RP for hobbyist photographers, people wanting to get into the full-frame market, the RP is a fantastically priced offering. There's no question that this is a far more affordable camera than the competition at the moment, although it's obviously lower spec as well. So in terms of price to performance, what you're paying for the features you get, I still think it's not as good a value for money as the competition, but it is a far more appealing camera than the competition to people on a budget. The only thing throwing me at the minute is, so far Canon's got two relatively low-end mirrorless cameras and yet are throwing everything at high-end lenses. Yes, they've got the 24-240 and that 35mm macro lens on the way, but everything else is L-grade pro glass. So Canon need a pro body to go with the pro lenses, which I've no doubt they are working on one and there will be one down the line, and they want pro lenses ready for when the pro body hits. However, I would have also liked to have seen them announce some lower end lenses to go with it. Because it's all well and good saying we've got a full frame camera that's only $1,300 and is, you know, as light as an APS-C camera, as small as an APS-C camera. Oh, but all the lenses we've got are only pro lenses that are more expensive and double the weight as well. So I would like to have seen Canon announce some lower end lenses to go with the RP, just to give people more of a reason to delve into the RF system. Now, the RP is available for pre-order in 3 different kit setups. So you can have the body on its own, which on B&H at the minute is $1,299. You can have the RP with the EF 24-105 variable aperture STM lens, along with the adapter, which is $1,699. Or you can get the RP with the RF 24-105 f4 LIS for $2,199, which quite hilariously means they've done it again like they did with the EOS R. So, piece of consumer advice for you. The RP with the 24-105 f4 LIS, $2,199. The camera body on its own, $1,299. On B&H, you can buy the 24-105 f4 LIS on its own for $899, which means if you buy the camera body and the lens separate from each other, you pay $1 less than you do if you buy the bundle. And here's me thinking that bundles usually bring the price down. The RP looks like a pretty good option. I don't think it's really going to find favor as a main camera for pro shooters, but I do think it's going to be a really good selling camera amongst hobbyist photographers and people looking for a second body as a backup. And then also the 6 new, rather interesting looking RF lenses that are going to greatly expand the Canon lineup as well. So I think it's going to make a very appealing setup for Canon. I just hope that this isn't a precursor for Canon sucking people into the system and then screwing them on the pro bodies later. But time will tell. What are your thoughts and opinions on the RP and the new RF lenses, and where do you think it's going to go in the future? Leave your thoughts and comments in the box down below. Thank you so much for stopping by, and hopefully I will see you in the next video.